Hello and welcome here to another edition of Best of the West, a National League West Division podcast. Here for Blake Street Banner, I'm your host, Skylar Timmons, joined here, as always, by Kenneth Weber. Kenneth, how you doing?
Life is good, man. Just looking over these playoff projections on Fangraphs. For Rockies fans, not great, but otherwise, life is good.
Yeah, it's that time of year where we talked a lot about prospects last week. There's now projections for the season coming in, and that more or less fills in that lull of not a whole lot.
Mhm.
I guess like NBA trades. That's the most exciting thing happening in the sports world. That's about it. As we wait for the Super Bowl, everything
Yeah,
or the superb owl.
baseball's getting a bit of a backseat, but baseball also has the luxury of kind of having a season to itself that no other sport does.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's soon we're going to get to that point where there's nothing else to talk about but baseball. And I think as baseball fans, as seam heads, this is where we start getting that itch. This is where baseball season is really, encroaching upon us. We're so many days away from pitchers and catchers kind of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
the true ball fans come out around this time of year.
Uh, Real quick before we get into the bulk of our show, Kenneth, what would be I guess the National League West equivalent of somebody trading a Luka Doncic? I don't even know how to say his name.
Doncic.
Yeah.
Imagine Barry Bonds in 2001 Giants land, where they just, let's
Mm-hmm.
say 2003, right? They just got off the World Series, just lost, and the Giants said, you know what? We're out of the Barry Bonds business now. Now there's a lot more baggage on it, but I think that's kind of the magnitude that this trade is being talked about in the sports
Mm-hmm.
world. So there is kind of a what a time to be alive feeling, I think, just hearing this trade being discussed as a sports fan.
Mm-hmm. And as fans of the Rockies and covering the Rockies, we're no strangers to disgruntlement or dysfunction between a star player and a front office organization.
We
So,
got at least 3 generations of that behind us. Like,
yeah.
yeah, there's some lineage on this. I will say one other thought that's come to mind on the whole Luka discussion. This and, like, the A-Rod trade and the
Hmm.
A-Rod trade saga between the Red Sox and the Yankees, after the Texas deal, I think that's the closest equivalent that I think I've come up to in sports to what's going on right now with the Luka deal. So,
Hmm.
that's baseball related at least.
Yeah. And kind of perfect because I believe it was like, what, 5 years ago or so when the Dodgers acquire Mookie Betts from the Red Sox. And holy cow, 5 years later, you look at how that's turned out for both teams where Dodgers just have a perennial MVP candidate, one
Mhm.
of many, and Red Sox didn't get a whole lot out of that whole deal. Just got out of some money.
And that
That's
was
the
the
main thing.
motivation. And
Yeah.
I think that's where it's always fair to criticize, as Rockies fans or people that live in Colorado and follow the team. Yeah, the fallout from the Arenado trade, even the Troy
Hmm.
Tulowitzki trade and the fallout from that, and then the return package with it. Ultimately, when you trade the best player in the deal, it's kind of hard to be the winner of the deal. Now,
Yeah.
sometimes you fare pretty well, like a Juan Soto trade. The Nationals have CJ Abrams, Mackenzie Core. They have impact players. But usually this just kind of defines your franchise. And I think that, right now we're seeing the NBA equivalent of it, but this this is the time, for a lot of baseball teams. And the Rockies are still living through it. And I think with Mookie
Yeah.
Betts, the Red Sox have kind of been doing the same thing, just not to the soap opera level that the Rockies have
Hmm.
in that period of time.
Yeah. So it's always interesting. Like you said, it's tough to be the winner in those trades when you're the one trading away the superstar, especially
Mhm.
when you kind of doing it out of desperation than actively trying to improve your team,
Yeah,
so to
there
speak.
was there was no way that deal was happening if they didn't take on David Price's money too.
Yeah.
They weren't gonna pay Mookie, and they didn't wanna pay Price anymore. That, at the end of the day, was the sheer motivation. If you're Alex Verdugo, you're in a no-win situation. That's a decent big league player that came over, but he was never gonna be Mookie, and that's what they
Hmm.
were looking for. Yeah, and then that's before we even get into, the financial implications and some other deals, the Arenado one specifically
Yeah.
too. So there's bigger things that go into all these, but ultimately the Red Sox didn't want to pay and didn't want to play in the same ballpark as the Yankees, as what the Padres started doing, and they've kind of been a mediocre franchise for the past 6 years because 5, 6 years because of it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's that the trades and transactions always weird. You remember when the Dodgers did that trade to acquire Josh Beckett and that whole like huge
The
package
money
of
swap.
players? Yeah, that big old money swap trade.
That's not even the best one. So that one was Adrian Gonzalez and Josh Beckett. So there
Yeah,
was like kind of a win now to it. Ultimately, that was once again Boston skirting the bill on the
yeah.
the promises they made. I think the more fun one is the Matt Kemp trade. I think to the Reds. It was like the Reds, Braves, and Dodgers did a three-team trade of just useless veterans, all very expensive. And so you're swapping out one extra year for $10 million
Mhm.
less this year, kind of thing. Like that's all it was. It was like Alex Wood and Matt Kemp and like six other contracts that all had eight figures in it. So
Yeah.
you see these trades every now and then too.
Yeah, wasn't that was the year they sent Yasiel Puig over to the Reds.
Puig might have been part of that
That
too.
was it.
Yeah.
I think that was it instead of
There's probably like a
yeah,
dozen big leaguers in that trade that are still
happens all
involved.
the time.
Hey, with Kyle Farmer.
Yeah,
What? Some guys are in the news too, involved
there
with
you
that
go.
trade.
Yeah, so it's always fun stuff, but wild. But this is a good little segue into kind of the bulk of what we wanted to talk about tonight. Uh, more or less split this into two conversations. But first, the ranking the best and worst moves for the National League West before the 2025 season. We've got pitchers and catchers, showing up next week, and then everybody else will show. Everybody shows up at the same time. I don't know why we'd change the designation, but whatever.
It's
Uh,
always one day's difference. Who's on
yeah,
the 13th, the 14th, or the 15th?
yeah,
They're already a lot of them are already there.
yeah. They're
If
all
you
there
didn't know
anyway.
that.
But wanted to rank through and just talk about some of the moves for each of these teams and just the best moves and some of the worst moves and kind of get into that as well. And as always, we appreciate those hanging out in the comments. Always appreciate your feedback and joining along in the conversation as we go through these things. But let's kick things off. Just right off the top of your head here, Kenneth, what would you say is the absolute best move by the National League West team this offseason?
The optics of Roki Sasaki's situation, I think, makes the Dodgers win by default, being able to
Mhm.
acquire that talent at that price. So I think let's just say let's throw that out because the unicorn happened to arrive in the division. I would say, I for the Diamondbacks, it's definitely a very big swing with Corbin Burnes, but a really good move that, heading into the offseason, we questioned, are they losing something more than just the player with Christian Walker? Are they losing, kind of a clubhouse? They at least addressed it really directly with the acquisition of Josh Naylor. Long term, I have questions if they're going to lock him up and all that, but for the team and the fit, I really like the Josh Naylor acquisition in Arizona, and I think that's gotten lost a little bit with a lot of the news since then.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of where I agree with you, knocking it out of the park. It's hard to bet against the Dodgers. They're also the ones that make the most transactions, so it's
Right.
they're kind of
The odds are in the favor. It's the Dodgers versus the field in everything. And since we're
Mhm.
never in on the NL West, it's a much tighter clump we're
Yeah.
talking about.
But with Roki Sasaki, it's just you get an immediate plug and play player like we talked about last week, number one prospect in baseball, comes in on MLB Network's top 100 players. He's number 100 immediately without even throwing a
Mhm.
pitch in the big leagues. So it's hard to bet against that with the best transaction, just bang for your buck. If we're talking straight up money, what a bargain for them to get this
Yeah.
caliber of player for cheap to immediately plug into their already stacked team to add to their depth.
The just on the surface, without speaking to any of the potential, you acquired what is, a general consensus top 100 player in the game. Now, maybe that's a little exaggerated because we haven't seen him play, but at the same time, there's a lot of background to this guy. You did all of this without having to acquire him with any financial risk. Let's say Roki Sasaki doesn't work out. The worst case scenario, there's injuries that occur through there. The
Mhm.
Dodgers, any team, just acquired the best player in the available through the free agent market, and if he never throws a single pitch, it's not even going to make a dent into the Dodgers' future operations. So I think that's where it's really envious and there's the Dodger hate and fatigue that comes into it. But again, that was the optics of his situation from the get-go. So anybody who acquired him, it was going to be the best move no matter what. Now,
Mhm.
the thing with the Dodgers is we have 9 other moves to talk about that are also pretty
Yeah.
good, and that adds to the frustration.
Yeah. So running down this list of other transactions, notable ones, they signed Blake Snell. They got Tanner Scott. They also re-signed Teoscar Hernandez, Blake Trinan. They added in Michael Conforto. They made some trades. So they traded away Gavin Lux, and then also a couple other guys just for international bonus money. Dylan Campbell, Ronaldo Atigua, traded them away for international bonus pool money, which was then used for Sasaki. So ton of other little minor league moves that they made as well to just fill the system. Like there's a you go over to roster resource on Fangraphs, and that list just keeps getting. Kirby Yates is on there now. They signed,
After Scott.
yeah, they got David Bodie on on a minor league deal. Former Rocky Julian Fernandez on a minor league deal. So they signed Hyseon Kim, who gets lost in the mix.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and
you
the
just go down the
offseason kicked
list.
off the offseason kicked off with the Blake Snell acquisition, and again, that just feels like it was a season ago, and so you have tiers when it comes to the Dodgers, and I think you can
Mhm.
also classify their moves in tiers. Obviously, the Sasaki acquisition is special, but a lot more of these moves that are being made by the team aren't big splashes. These are depth and ancillary pieces that are being picked up. Now, I
Mhm.
think there's a good argument on Snell not necessarily being that case because that's a pretty high profile deal and in division. But the rest of it, they kind of moved on from some depth in Gavin Lux, but then they also bolstered their bullpen with Yates and Scott. And if what you're losing in Lux, you're getting back with Kim, it's a wash on that too. And we're talking about the defending champions at the same time. So you also didn't have a lot of fixes that needed to be made in the first place. So it's a smart organization addressing themselves in multiple ways, all in the same offseason. And I think if you're fans of another organization, you wish yours would operate the same way.
Mhm. Yeah, it's hard to argue that it feels like in the National League West they didn't. It's hard to argue that they didn't win the West here in this offseason. Just sheer talent that they're able to bring in. Just if we're strictly speaking from a player perspective of the quality of talent they bring in, it's easy to say. No, when you get talking about the money and the length of the contracts and all that stuff, it's a whole nother conversation that you can kind of build a discussion around. Like Norm points out that aside from Roki, free agent signings maybe 1 or 2 years long, which lose in value. Absolutely. And when you're the
Mhm.
Dodgers, they can take that risk of like, yeah, we can throw on an extra year to get the guy we want. And hey, defer that money, baby.
Yeah, you have the luxury at the end of
Yeah.
the day as a larger market, and baseball is always unique in the fact that there is no salary cap. It's an open market. So you have the luxury as a large market team to make some mistakes and live from it. So that brings an interesting point. Is there any bad moves in your opinion that you think they made this offseason?
Hmm.
What could they afford to have whiffed on, so to speak, this offseason or just kind of in general lately?
Yeah, if anything, it's more like the Michael Conforto one is the one
Mhm.
that doesn't really jump out as
And it wasn't cheap.
yeah,
17 million. I think Conforto is a pretty easy answer. I think it's a talented player, but an injured player past his prime a little bit.
yeah,
Um, I think if he's hitting in Cincinnati, I feel better too. When we talked about Conforto on the show a couple of weeks back, San Francisco was not kind to him. Not
no,
in terms of the team or anything else. It's just the ballpark was not a good fit for him. I don't think LA is a massive upgrade. LA is not a hitter's friendly park. And so if you put him in a lefty friendly environment and let him do his thing, I have more faith. Conforto, I could see him kind of going the way of Noah Syndergaard. You remember Syndergaard, the Dodger? That was like a half season experiment kind of
yeah,
thing. So it's not always foolproof with the organization. But hey, if they sign Conforto for 17 million, I also trust that if it doesn't work out, they can get rid of some of that money too. That's
yeah,
another thing with their operation.
yeah. He's the one with a question mark on him of who knows? Like
Yeah,
he could have a good season, like away from Oracle. He was pretty good. If he can
sure.
just replicate that the whole season, hey,
Yeah.
not too shabby.
you're running a risk too with Kim's basically replacing Lux.
Yeah.
Mookie's going to be a middle infielder primarily, and so again, that's not ideal, I think. And so you do want some insurance if you have it. And if Kim doesn't fit, do you have somebody behind him? Knowing the Dodgers probably, but you could miss Lux. So there is some risk to that too. That's a proven major league player.
Yeah, but overall with the Dodgers,
I
with
think they'll be
all of
fine.
with all of their moves, a lot of just good transactions. If you had to rank like their top 3 transactions, real quick before we move on to our next team, top 3 transactions for the Dodgers in your opinion.
Roki slam dunk. Teoscar, I think we haven't really touched on him. That was such a perfect fit for both of them. So bringing that back for another one, I think is ideal. And then Scott's a really good reliever, and Scott also owned Otani, so let's throw that in there because you kind of make yourself better in 2 aspects by removing some of your kryptonite and employing it against your opponents.
Yeah, gets interesting stuff. But
Mhm.
we'll touch on the Dodgers again here in a little bit when we get back to talking about worst transaction, touching on everything else. But
Mhm.
we'll get on those. But sticking with our best transactions, let's move out down to the Bay, out to San Francisco, who've had an interesting offseason. They've taken some swings, but ultimately, there's really 2 notable moves that they make to improve the big league roster in additions wise. Willy Adames and Justin Verlander, where would you rank those among the National League West?
Uh, Adamas is a bigger splash than I think people give it credit for, and I think he's also maybe one of the most underappreciated offensive players, kind of really of this generation, of this decade. So, boy, I would put that right behind Burns. I'd put that probably as the third largest
Mhm.
external acquisition of the offseason. So I think it's a pretty big swing, but the whole thing with the Giants, we've been saying the whole time, you need more. Adamas alone isn't enough to bolster them into the same conversation with the Dodgers. And
Mhm.
so it's a start. I think the story with the Giants on the surface is okay, they got a little bit better. They're maybe a wild card team still. But Zahidi leaving and Posey taking over and everything of how their operation is going to be moving forward, and this being the first off season of seeing that, I think is the bigger storyline. So again, with the Giants, it still kind of feels like we're just waiting to see more, but now at least we know that there's a new direction with that
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, and no, it's with Willy Adames. Yeah, he's one of the better acquisitions there just among the NL West teams, but I put him, like, number 5 if I had to, like, rank a top 5, he comes in at, like, number 5. If I just had to pick 5, which feels like it's not
Not a
a
bad
huge,
player.
yeah, not awful, it's not terrible for the Giants, but it feels like that shouldn't have been their biggest move.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it before of, oh, are they gonna get a Pete Alonso? Well, they were in the mix for Corbin Burnes. No, they get Corbin Burnes, that shoots up to where Arizona probably sitting.
Yeah.
But instead, he's your big one. Like, yeah, nice addition, 7-year contract. Let's hope he can, you know, take advantage and dominate at Oracle or find it compatible.
Hmm.
It'll
Yeah,
be interesting there.
and then this is also added to the extension of Matt Chapman, which
Yeah.
was kind of the starting point for the new regime with the Giants. So when I look at the Giants right now, I feel pretty good with the left side of the infield of Willy Adames and Matt Chapman. The problem is I don't feel very good seeing Tyler Fitzgerald, Lamont Wade Jr., Mike Yastrzemski, and Heliot Ramos
Hmm.
as being what's around it. There needs to be more. I think Jung Hoo Lee could be an addition just from healthy for this season. Good. Now you're adding somebody else to the group. That offense needs addressing, and Adamas alone doesn't do it. So they're just kind of a middle of the road team right now, and I think
Hmm.
that that's kind of holding course with the moves that they made this year, and with kind of the state they've been in the past couple seasons too.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just interesting because you feel like there should be more coming from the Giants, and it sounded like Buster Posey was coming out and saying, "Hey, coming out pretty recently. He's like, we're pretty set with our roster where we're at right now. Now, if that's just negotiating tactic, who knows? But no, getting pointed out to us here, probably one of the best or creative transactions by the team was Buster Posey taking over the reins for the organization and being instrumental in moving these players and bringing them in to move the team in a new direction.
It's definitely the most interesting storyline to come out of San Francisco this offseason. And I just see San Francisco in a weird spot of almost rebuilding, but without going and reaching the rock bottom.
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of the mode they're in. It really wouldn't surprise me to see San Francisco turn into a seller this offseason if things just aren't right. You see maybe a Logan Webb starts generating a ton of interest. Do I see the Giants do it? Depends on how they're playing and how happy they are with their development. Do they use that as the catalyst for what Buster Posey sees this organization being in a year or two? I can definitely see a world where that happens. So I'm kind of in a wait and see mode with San Francisco. And I think that their moves this offseason earned that, to be honest.
Yeah. It's a lot of just, can the foundation they kind of tried to lay down just a little bit last year with that rotation and some of these other additions, can they start bearing some fruit moving into this next season? And then hopefully then the next off season they can build up even more. Who knows? But yeah, it's kind of middling results. Like not terrible, though the Justin Verlander one, we'll probably talk about that a little bit. But
Yeah, Verlander's nice. Verlander at this point, what are just remove the name and the Hall of Famer and the best right-hander of our generation out of it. What are you truly expecting out of a 42-year-old that's been having some durability issues in the past couple of seasons and has had, a checkered past, tail end of his career?
yeah,
You're not totally confident about that, but who knows? Maybe you get some essence of that Hall of Fame pitcher and he helps you win some games.
it's a
That-
lot of he's a lot of a eh,
Yeah. It
meh.
feels weird saying that about Justin Verlander, but it had to kind of happen at some point. So
Yeah,
this might be the last season. It could be the farewell tour. That totally could be what this season turns into for the San Francisco Giants. It's just
yeah,
kind of a farewell tour for Justin Verlander, which would be weird if he stayed the whole year there,
yeah,
if that's
yeah,
the case.
absolutely. Who knows? Hey, send him back over to Detroit at the deadline.
You think so? Watch him wind up somewhere just completely obscure, though. Right? He finishes his career with the Chicago White Sox.
Oh no.
I don't know, but San Francisco's fine. And when we talked about their farm system too, that's kind of middling. They're really excited about Bryce Eldridge, but how much more impact players are on the way too? So I see San Francisco making some big swings for their future outlook under Buster Posey, and I could see this year being when they start pulling some of those triggers after he's had time to assess and really get his hands on the collection that they have, the collection of talent they have already on hand.
Hmm. Absolutely. Uh, yeah. So not much. The Giants haven't done much else, and we'll talk a little
They
bit more about.
signed Pete Alonso, and now I'll start talking a lot more about you challenging for the division, but they're not going down that road, it seems like.
Yeah, not pulling the trigger on it. But who knows? Maybe they'll sign him just like they did Matt Chapman, just like halfway through spring training or into the early bit of the season.
Yep.
Ooh.
Yeah, so who knows? That's an interesting thing about all this, and like we talked about the fan graph, projections and playoff standings. When Pete Alonso lands somewhere, there's still some impact free agents that could change the outlook of the season for some teams. One of the
Mhm.
more recent ones was Jurickson Profar signing with the Braves. Not the biggest needle mover, but when you're looking at the Braves heading into the season, adding a Profar really kind of helps. And
Mhm.
so, there are still some players out there that could change the equation in the NL West right now. But if it's really not the Padres or the Giants doing it, because the Diamondbacks, let's be real, have kind of done their work already. If it's not the Padres or the Giants doing it, it's hard to see big needle movers or
Yeah,
just the Dodgers getting better.
yeah. Absolutely. And speaking of big needle movers, let's head out to San Diego. Talk about just any of their transactions. Actually, no, let's skip to San Diego for now. Let's go out to Arizona. Arizona has more to talk about.
Talk about something more. There's not a lot to talk about San Diego. I mean, honestly, like We can touch on them real quick, but Elias Diaz, that's it. They were in on Sasaki big time. We talked about how he's the unicorn in the sweetheart deal, but that's it to report on San
Yeah.
Diego. Check the box.
They will be a highlight in our other half of our discussion about the worst transactions.
Yep.
Uh,
Arizona though was awesome. We talked about Burnes. We talked about Josh Naylor. They lost Christian Walker, so there's kind of a wash aspect to it. But you landed the best free agent pitcher on the market. You're objectively better because of adding a Corbin Burnes, and so this is a World Series team as of 2 years ago, believing that they can get back there, and they're making the right moves with that mentality.
yeah. Yeah. The thing I love about the Corbin Burnes thing is that he came to the Diamondbacks like, hey, I want to be in Arizona, be close to his family. So there's the personal aspect of it. But then him like, hey, I want to be a Diamondback, and the Diamondbacks like, oh dang, like we need to get this done, and that came together in a few days. So that's huge for them in a rotation that has some questions going forward. No, past this 2025 season, they lock in an ace caliber pitcher who can still opt out after a couple of years, but it puts them in a nice position in that rotation to help support it a little bit more after it was a little shaky last season. But that's a big one, and that one fits into a top 3 for me. Like we were saying before, in ranking in the division,
Mm-hmm.
if Roki's number 1, Corbin Burnes, I think, is in that top 3 of
Yeah,
transactions for teams and the impact that it can have.
impact and magnitude. I mean, this is a very large deal. And so this is also one where the Diamondbacks have a history of being really bound and held to the results of their largest investment. And for a couple of years before, during their dark period and their rebuild, uh, Madison Bumgarner and that hefty contract is pretty much all you could talk about when it came to the Diamondbacks, and it being an albatross with the team. Zach Greinke never quite reached that point, but right now they're in the Jordan Montgomery mode of basically being unhappy with a large free agent pitching deal. They're probably assuredly getting 1, 2, 3 good years of peak Corbin Burnes, if not peak close to it then.
Mhm.
And how it ages in the tail end of the deal if he doesn't opt out. That's where the Diamondbacks have been burned. And so I'm sure there's a little bit of hesitation or feeling a little scared over the possibilities there. But heading into this season, I could absolutely don't have to squint very hard to see the Diamondbacks as a World Series team again. I think you need rebounds and a full season of production from a lot of guys like Corbin Carroll. Bad first halves are really what cost the team during their World Series run and last season. So there's some things that need to be ironed out, but a Corbin Burnes can really get that team back on track to avoid those skids every fifth day. And so the impact on the field is that alone, and that's huge for a team that has World Series aspirations.
Yeah, and then you add in Josh Naylor, who you mentioned before. He's a nice substitute to slide in there at first base, a nice power left-handed bat to add into the mix, decent defender, decent enough. But he's really there for that left-handed power bat, replacing a Jock Peterson, replacing a Christian Walker, a nice, solid, addition, and works out for him. And
Mhm.
a nice addition. So you can get that into the bat. And then just recently, they re-signed Randall Grichuk, who people may not know it. He actually had a pretty dang good year with the D-backs last year in that platoon bat role
Mhm.
where he comes in and mashed against lefties, absolutely trashed them, and also had pretty good splits against righties, but really was there to be that left-handed or be the platoon against left-handers. They bring him back on a relatively cheap deal. Nice little bench depth piece if he can replicate what he did last season.
Yeah. We talked about the Dodgers not needing to fix a whole lot because obviously they're the defending champions. The Diamondbacks are also in a good period of their history where they have a lot of young, controllable pieces that are the core of their team. So they're making veteran acquisitions to either kind of help them take the next step in what is a Corbin Burnes, replace what they lost maybe in a Josh Naylor for Christian Walker, or just some good pieces here and there like a Grand Old Grichuk. So the same way the Dodgers are operating on tiers just to address some spots here and there when they need to,
Mhm.
that's kind of the way the Diamondbacks are right now. Now you're hoping for internal improvements, which is always the scary proposition. And if those don't happen, you're kind of screwed. But the Diamondbacks at least have evidence and history on their side saying these performances are there. So a good position that this team is already in, and it took some years to get there, but now they're making just smart, savvy moves around the edges of that core that they established, and that's great.
Yeah. No, it's pretty interesting, but nice little moves from the Diamondbacks where they get the big splash, and then they have these other little savvy moves to throw in there, which is a smart team that's a good smart team,
Yeah.
smart moves. You
You,
don't have
as a Diamondbacks fan, you have your concerns to some
yeah,
degree, but you're pretty happy with where you're at right now.
yeah. It's that knowledge of, oh, well, they'll be competitive. Like, these are some good competitive moves. Yeah, maybe we'd like them to go do some more stuff, but still we can be happy with things they are doing and just trust the process a little bit more. They've gained that, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they deserve the benefit of the doubt because they're walking the walk of a team with playoff and maybe title aspirations. And
Mhm.
so it's a shoe that fits right now. And so it's the one you just got to applaud and enjoy because there were some bad periods, some bad years before these years for the Diamondbacks.
Mhm. Yeah, things looking up there in the desert, but yeah, Corbin Burnes is definitely up there in that top 3 moves for me, this offseason, but in the National League West. Now let's move into the mountains to the Colorado Rockies, who actually did some things. Not a lot
Eh,
of things,
eh.
but some things.
Yeah.
These are, honestly, as average as you can get. These are like the basis. These are the
Yeah.
median among all these transactions.
The
They
minimal amount required.
yeah, it's like they're not terrible moves,
Hmm.
but they're also not needle movers. They bring in Tyro Estrada and Kyle Farmer, and then re-sign Jacob Stallings, and that's it for the major league free agents. A bunch of other minor league deals and acquisitions that they've done there, but they also brought in Jimmy Herget on a waiver claim. So that's the basis of what they've been doing. Otherwise, it's hoping everything in house can bounce back coming into this new season.
Yeah, I mean, it can really be surmised, and Stallings is still the veteran catcher that they want to have around as they transition to the youth movement with Drew Romo, and they replace Brendan Rodgers with kind of what they figure is a less expensive version of himself with Tyro Estrada, and Kyle Farmer is just kind of the middle infield depth, along with quite a few other moves. You look around a lot of rosters through Major League Baseball, and there's not a lot of opportunities for a minor league free agent to get into serious playing time. The Rockies are one of the few teams where that actually does exist. And so you can't take a Keston Hira signing or an Owen Miller lightly because there's a very real chance that they'll be getting some serious major league run. And that's what you're asking for when all you do is add a Tyro Estrada and re-sign a Jacob Stallings. You know,
Yeah,
so that's the position the Rockies are in. And really, the bigger news about that: Charlie retired. It's the end of an era. Charlie's back. Charlie is now in the front office with General Manager Bill Schmidt. So that's kind of feeling like the biggest storyline too, and maybe the most creative move that they've had all year.
yeah. No, it's just keeping guys in the fold, and Chuck will have the opportunity to get his feet wet and figure out really what he wants to do for the future. I think I've talked about this before, where I've referred to it as like it's basically feels like that internship of just shotgun blast. Okay, Charlie, you're gonna do a couple of things throughout the year,
Yeah.
and then let him settle in and figure out what exactly he wants to do. But yeah, I think that'll be a good move for the Rockies and Charlie Blackmon. Probably their best move to keep him in the fold and to share that knowledge with the younger generation of players down in the minors.
He's a lifetime guy, and the Rockies, for all their warts over the years, they really do hold on to some lifetime guys. One that comes to mind is still in the dugout practically every day, in Vinny Castilla.
Mhm.
And Charlie is on that Mount Rushmore, not necessarily just of greatest players, but most loved players in Colorado history and most adored. And so, and he also spent his entire career here, so him staying with the organization was no surprise. And when it comes to these roles, they're generally pretty ambiguous in terms of the information. He'll have his role, he'll have what works for him, what helps the ball club, whatever it is. And he's still gonna be part of the team. And so that is nice and comforting in his respect. And hopefully it's something that can have some positive effects maybe on the operation of the Rockies as a whole moving forward. Because I know there are some things with Charlie that he thought as a hitter that he implemented on his own that could become common practice within the organization too, specifically citing some of that road hitting philosophy. So it's positive on that front, and that's nice. It'd be nice if there was more positive fronts for the outlook of the season for the Rockies and some moves they made, but that's just not what they're doing. The more interesting thing that could have happened with the Rockies, there's a whole lot of prospect cloggage kind of going within their pipeline a little bit in a few spots, and they'd be in a position where they could deal from that prospect, either in a prospect for prospect deal, get some young controllable talent, or make a big swing upgrade with some of the younger pieces they have on hand, but they're prospect hugging, so nothing happened there. But if anybody should be getting the most creative and trying out some moves and some trade and hitting the trade market hard, it should be the Rockies, because they're pretty clearly the worst team in this division.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you can hold on to those prospects, some of them your top ones, but there's only 9 spots on the field.
Yeah. You can love, Norm pointed out Dollander and Condon, and absolutely a lot of the future hinges on their outlook. But when you have Montgomery, Veen, Yanquiel Fernandez, Jordan Beck, and Nolan Jones all battling for one position, somebody's going to have to go eventually. And then that's how you end up with Elahiris Montero conversations. And, it's you've been burnt before if you're a Rockies fan, and you're kind of seeing what could be a problem in the future and hoping that they use this to address some other parts of the organization, but they're not. And so it might be a problem again in the future.
Yeah. Before we move on to the Padres, I do want to throw out one idea of actually one of their better transactions, releasing Brendan Rodgers and just biting the bullet finally and just moving on from that.
It took some guts. The thing with the Rodgers, it's hard to look at that singularly.
Yeah.
You attach Brendan Rodgers' name to that could have been JT Realmuto. That could have been Edward Cabrera. That could have been anything else before this point. So I think given just this year and for 2025 and where the Rockies are at, yes, it absolutely makes sense. And it took some courage to do it, but they walked away and ripped off the Band-Aid. The problem is that wound should have been addressed way, way earlier. And,
Absolutely.
And so that's also the baggage that comes with that move. And that's kind of a bummer to say.
Yeah, absolutely. But at least they did something with that
finally.
And moving in a direction. But then it's when they release him and then immediately sign Kyle Farmer and Tyro Estrada. Like, hey, here's 2 different versions of the player we just released.
Yeah, but don't forget Amador's on the way, right? So you're looking at a 1-year patch with the Rockies and with these moves. Stallings coming back is a re-sign, and he had a pretty decent season for him. But really, are you expecting Jacob Stallings in 2026, 2027? Are you really even expecting Stallings to be the starter at the end of 2025? So that's the moves you're making, and these are not winning aspiration moves. These are just treading water moves a little bit right now.
You're in those commercials where you're just slapping the rubber over the hole in the water barrel.
Yeah. Here's a good one from the crew. Should the Rockies have hired Jacob Stallings for the front office and re-signed Charlie Blackmon instead? Personally, I would have put Charlie Blackmon at catcher.
Yeah, there we go. That's the only logical
outcome of this
outcome of all that.
Stallings is a good veteran presence. I have no qualms with the Jacob Stallings re-signing, and I think that to a much, much lower degree. This is the Teoscar Hernández. It's kind of a good fit for both sides. So
Yeah.
let's run it back for another year. But there are no delusions that you have solved any problems in the bigger
Yeah.
picture by bringing back Jacob Stallings for another year.
Yeah. His role is to be the mentor to, ideally for me, a Drew Romo, and the mentor to the backup catcher to prime them to take over. And like, hey, here's how you prep for the big leagues and work with catching and all that good stuff.
And the Rockies have been adding more and more interesting catching talent in over the years. I seriously doubt it turns out this way, but somebody that's been turning a lot of heads for the Rockies organization is Cole Carrick. And Cole Carrick does have catching experience. And when we talked about the Giants, well, Buster Posey is Mr. Giant kind of now, at least of this generation. He had a similar all everything profile coming out of Florida State. So who knows? Maybe somebody like a Cole Carrick ends up going down the path of being a catcher and sticking with that. And that's the imprint that, or that's what Jacob Stallings is able to help imprint. I doubt it, but they have been adding more catching depth. So even if it's not Romo, there's some interesting guys that could be impacted by bringing a good veteran presence back for another season. Small move, the smart move.
Yeah. But hey, when in doubt, we also have 35-year-old Austin Nola right there to be the backup catcher if needed.
Yep. And there's veteran depth. The Rockies will never not have a bevy of minor league free agents with an invite to spring training.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a long list there.
You'll always find them. But before we move on, we'll move on to our worst transactions, just the wide berth across the division. But first, Kenneth, we can put a nix on the hopes of Pete Alonso going to the Giants or anywhere else because he's heading back to the Mets. That's right, Jonathan. Heading back to the Mets. Hide the women and kids. Pete Alonso's back with the Mets, pending a physical, 2 years with an opt-out after the first season. It's he'll make $30 million this year, and then it's a guarantee of $54 million over 2 years. That's what Jeff Passan's reporting sources. So yeah, the polar bear sticking out there in New York with the Mets.
As Alonso dragged on, it became clear that it was kind of Mets or bust. There had to be somebody else out there. But towards the end of Alonso, didn't it just kind of feel like the Mets were negotiating with themselves?
In a sense, yeah.
Yeah, and like maybe that's obviously Chris Bryant's deal blows Alonso's out of the water, but that's kind of how the Bryant deal felt at the end too. Where it's like, dude, the Rockies really have to do that. So, my initial impression, it's a decent chunk, but there is not a lot of belief for the profile of a Pete Alonso because Pete Alonso is a consensus, easily top 5, top 3, if not best first baseman in baseball kind of deal, and people don't want to pay for that, and that's kind of a bummer to see because Alonso crushes, man, and he could have helped a lot of teams, but it kind of came down to just the Mets at the end.
Yeah. So hey, at least he stays home, and it's a Mets lineup. Now you have Alonso back, and then you have Soto in that lineup with some other guys. So a nice little Mets lineup shaking up there. But man, it would have been nice to. He seemed like a guy that could have flourished with a San Francisco Giants or something that really helped them out. But instead,
he kind of could have been that missing piece for a contending team. And honestly, the Mets might be that team that's in that position too. Juan Soto needed some support. Vientos had a really good breakout in the second half of last year, but is that really the guy he is? How much is left in Jesse Winker? Because there's already been one career revitalization. So they're in good shape, and he definitely helps them out. Again, Toronto, this might have been a huge impact and been somebody that could have made a big swing for, adding Toronto with him and Santander. It would have been interesting to see him go somewhere else. But at the end of the day, hey, him and Soto, that's a pretty dangerous middle of the lineup.
But hey, that's Scott Boras magic happening right
Scott
before
Boras
our eyes.
February magic. This is an annual tradition.
And then he'll have a excellent year and then opt out and then go sign a big 6-year deal somewhere else.
I hope he gets a little bit more term because if Pete Alonso can't get paid, it makes it harder for more and more guys. Pete Alonso got less years than Christian Walker this year.
Yeah. Oh, that's wild.
You're not expecting that heading in. So again, there's a whole demographic problem with first baseman, and I don't know. I would like to see that narrative break a little bit because I just miss the days. Everybody talks about the production that you get out of the corner position, but generally
Mhm.
speaking, people don't pay for it. First base has become like the equivalent of the NFL running back, where it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's just a guy.
You can throw anybody there.
Yeah, we can get 25 home runs out of anybody right now. Most teams aren't really willing to pay. And then you look at some other teams and their production from first base over the years, and their plan is not working. So, Pete Alonso was out there and he could have addressed it, but teams just don't care to do it.
Yeah.
Feels weird.
Yes, indeed. But yeah, so we just had to throw that in there about Pete Alonso. Big news. But now we go across and just the division in general. Among all these moves, there were some stinkers in there, or at least what were some of maybe the worst moves or just decisions in the National League West. And I think this is where the San Diego Padres, unfortunately, have to take the cake. We mentioned Elias Diaz is their only guaranteed major league free agent signing. Now, there's been some other like little deals and things around. No, they were in play for Sasaki, but didn't get him.
Mm-hmm.
So that sticks them with Diaz as their main transaction. They haven't really done any trading. I think they like exchange cash for a random player. That's about it. And then, as we've talked about before, it's been behind the scenes. Just the turmoil of this team behind the scenes. I think he's kind of handcuffed them as they're also still trying to figure out what are we doing? What's our finances looking like moving forward?
Yeah, it feels almost like a cheat because there's no one move that really pops out that says this is the worst move. Corbin Burnes has risk of looking bad in the big picture, but that's about it. The Padres are just the lack of activity, the lack of moves, the lack of addressing anything is the biggest impact on this team. And they're also really just kind of getting pushed further and further to that cliff's edge because you have Dylan Cease and you have Michael King set to hit the free agent market after this season. So they're in a tough spot where they're feeling like they're paying attention to their financial situation more than the product on the field. And nothing embodies that more than their ownership situation right now, which is just a complete, mess that is probably going to get uglier before it starts getting any sort of resolution too, with their former owner passing away or,
Mm,
minor or majority owner.
yeah. And yeah, it's just all that turmoil behind the scenes, probably just like the lawsuits and the soap opera dramas, probably the worst
Yeah, it's the worst
activity,
look,
at
the worst
worst look.
vibes. Yeah, kind of. Well, Colorado is just in such a bad spot that you say what you will about them, but right now, San Diego, the days of Slam Diego feel like a thing of the past a little bit right now. They're
Yeah.
still close. They're still at the very end of that window of contention. It feels like. So they're giving it one more go, and I see the roster, and who knows? Maybe it could be, maybe it could be enough, but otherwise, this is kind of the relic of a
Hmm.
team that probably already had their best chance.
Yeah. It's like this season, it feels like a do or die type of
Mhm.
season, like the last hurrah, and then who
You
knows what
need
comes next.
you need Tatis to play a full season and go MVP serious consideration kind of year, I think, for San Diego. And I think that that's been the plan for the past couple of years, and they've had enough good depth around it. You just haven't had enough, whether that's games of Tatis or moments of Tatis. And it's all built for him to lead the charge. And so if they get the best Fernando Tatis Jr. this year, it could still happen.
Yeah.
But they've been kinda chasing that dream for a couple of years now, and a lot of what was around him is no longer there. So that's
Hmm.
the reality of their situation.
Yeah. So it's interesting out in San Diego, and unfortunately, just not doing a whole lot, and the other extra things behind them kind of gives them the worst off season just in that aspect. Like, did they need to add a bunch of stuff? Not necessarily. team still is pretty much the same as it was last season. It was good rotation.
It's a playoff team.
Dylan Cease and Michael King, yeah, they were that close to making it to the championship series to take on the Mets.
Very legitimate playoff team. And the tough part now is I think that the moves that they want to make are also to deliberately lose pieces for financial purposes. Tell me your gut feeling, yes or no. Does at least one of Cease, Arise, and Michael King get traded? Maybe Ranger Suarez or Suarez as well, Robert Suarez?
I think Cease, it feels like Cease or King are going to be on the move at some point.
Do you think that they're probably the best players in that trade? It's probably headlined by a Cease or a King. Again, you're giving up the best player probably in those trades. So you're probably not looking like a better team when those players go away. So, and that's the more likely immediate moves that they're going to make. So there might be a worst move, a genuine worst move if a Dylan Cease trade looks pretty ugly on the return side. But for now, it's just they haven't done anything. So that's the worst look of anybody.
Yeah. Because, at least everybody else has done something, at least a little positive. Yeah. Not so much can be said for the Padres. Now, if they had been the ones to get Sasaki, we're having a wholly different conversation.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, they came in second.
Totally fair. They were very hard on it. And, you feel way better. But if they didn't get Sasaki, it was going to be a bust. Now we're hearing it's a bust. Diaz is a nice player. It's a good veteran piece that will help their team and their outlook of being a playoff team. But Sasaki could have put them over the hump to be the championship series team or a World Series team. And they fell short. And they pigeonholed themselves to Sasaki or bust. And that's kind of the decision, and everybody knew it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so and unfortunately, San Diego probably tops our worst transactions list of the offseason, but still, the other teams also had some type of things. We already talked about the Dodgers. Not really a bad transaction there. Just like questionable, like just kind of a meh.
You could see it not working out perfectly, which is like the worst outcome. What about the Giants? The Giants have some of that inactivity too. Is Verlander a bad move? Like Verlander, he was almost a 4-win player as of 2 years ago. But as of 6 months ago, he might be cooked too. So
that one feels like it needs more time to cook until we see him in action throughout the season. And then it'll be a retroactive, like, probably not a good move. But as of now, it's you like him as a mentor for that younger rotation, to help out Logan Webb and share some mentorship for those younger guys. But it's a lot of banking. It's a lot of them banking and hoping on rebounds of a healthy Robbie Ray, a healthy Justin Verlander, and that the rest of that rotation can develop, a Jordan Hicks and everything.
Yeah, and Hicks looks good. My mind just started going down a weird space where because a lot of this can be expressed on Max Scherzer signing with Toronto too. A lot of the same concerns. And I think that Toronto and San Francisco is an interesting comparison. I think there's more potency on Toronto's offense, while more assurance with San Fran's rotation, maybe. An interesting comparison between the two teams. But I don't know. I just started getting thinking on San Francisco versus Toronto and how comparable those two teams are. They were this close and they could have gone over the hump, but they just never really did what was needed to do what they needed. And also they're being held hostage by a mercenary veteran arm, which is weird.
Yeah.
A little bit. Verlander and Max Scherzer have just been around for how many teams have they been on in the past 3 years? 6?
Yeah. The mercenary German. They're the journeyman now.
Yeah. When was the last time we had the Boondock Saints of pitchers just going around the league? Like Scherzer and Verlander have. It's just when was the last time we had 2 over the 40 Hall of Famers just kind of making tours around the league?
Yeah.
It's interesting between the two.
That were on the team that were on the same team at the same time too at one point.
This is a Patrick Lyons question, obviously, but Yeah, just the fact that they're both doing it and kind of figure-eighting each other throughout the league is just really weird. They both went to Texas during the
Yep.
same trade season from the same team, so it's weird. Randy Johnson kind of had the tour like Patrick mentioned, but yeah, San Francisco and Toronto are both in that same oddly weird transitionary phase,
Yeah.
and they both have the old men in their
Yeah. They
rotations
just
too,
refuse to leave.
right?
But
Yeah,
yeah,
San Francisco, they traded Taylor Rogers. That could come back. Taylor Rogers is a really good left-handed pitcher. Not sure the motivation. First, they broke up the Roger twins, which rude.
mhm,
Second, Taylor is a pretty good pitcher, and is someone that could be missed from that San Francisco bullpen.
yeah. No, and it probably one of those, unfortunately, might have been a financial thing, maybe, but it was also just to maybe clear some room and let some other younger guys go. But because they're also sending 6 million, so they're paying half his salary this season to Cincinnati. But yeah, that probably not a
It's
great move. It's not a good look because it's like you didn't really need to trade him
mhm.
unless it was strictly for that finances. But you're getting rid of $6 million. Where's that money going to?
It's
If you're
hard, yeah.
paying Justin Verlander with that money and getting rid of a good bullpen piece, like, probably didn't need Verlander.
This is a guy that posted, one WAR, a 2.4 ERA in 64 games last year for him. So you're also not moving somebody where it wasn't working out. This is a pivotal piece. So um, it's hard not to look at this one and say it was financially motivated. And then, like you were just connecting the dots, you see Verlander's money, you see the money that was just saved on the Taylor Rogers deal. Again, there's that risk. Is Verlander gonna have the same juice in him still? Giving
Yeah,
that money from Rogers to Verlander could totally backfire on San Francisco this year.
yeah. So for a team that's wanting to like build up and maybe compete, it's going to be just how they fill that role in that bullpen of, okay, how do you replace that bullpen production from a left-hander? Well, you better hope you have have somebody that can step in and be an effective bullpen piece,
Yeah.
which they have some good bullpen pieces, but you need somebody else who can fill that role.
To be fair, I guess too, is they are dealing from a position of relative strength. It's not a bad
Yeah.
bullpen, and you're expecting more from Camilo Duval than the numbers that he posted last year. So you could probably make a convincing argument from that perspective, but that's about it.
Mhm.
So again, I think it all just boils down to how serious are you about being a title team? Because if you are, you keep Rogers and Verlander.
Mhm.
This was kind of a middling move, expecting middling results.
Yeah. As of now, looking at their projected roster, one left-hander in their bullpen
Yeah,
is what it
and
seems like. So
the Loogie's not what it used to be. There are new bullpen rules in place, and so left versus right isn't quite the same way. You just don't see teams stacking up multiple left-handers the way they used to. So that part also is in consideration of it, but this is just a really good relief pitcher. They have other
yeah.
really good relief pitchers. I get it, and Cincinnati looks good for acquiring one that can hopefully be a bridge to Diaz. But from San Francisco side, you can't have too many good pitchers. So unless the return that they got, which could be some prospect depth, and maybe that's their outlook. Hey, maybe that's there too, but just not sure of that yet. So for right now, it's very fair to question that move.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on from the Giants real quick out to Arizona. Did it feel like we talked about with the Dodgers where it didn't really feel like they had a bad move? Have the Diamondbacks actually had like a bad transaction this offseason?
Do you expect Randall Grichuk to perform to the level he did last year? That's a fair question. Is he the right depth piece? $5 million doesn't buy as much, I guess, for Arizona as it does for Los Angeles. Los Angeles, that's dropping the bucket a little bit. For Arizona, if $5 million isn't working out for them, they'll be motivated to move on from that five. So I'm not convinced that Grichuk is the best fit for them, but it worked
Mhm,
for him last year. And they need to balance out the lefties in their lineup with more righties. So they're hoping that Grichuk can be that player again. Hoping is not always the best plan.
yeah.
So I think it's fair to question him there. And then with Corbin Burnes, we talked about it a few times. how is it going to look 4 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
You're happy with it now. In 4 years, did the Arizona Diamondbacks ruin their title window by getting stuck into the Corbin Burnes contract? There's a small headline that does exist somewhere in my mind thinking of this deal. So it's fair to question it. But the pros really outweigh the cons with the Corbin Burnes acquisition, at least in the immediate for a team that could reach the World Series.
Yeah. I would say probably the worst move or decision for the Diamondbacks this offseason was their owner openly criticizing and saying, "We made a mistake signing Jordan Montgomery, who is still on the team."
The transaction of shade being thrown at your own player. How about that? So, okay, yeah. Well, Bob Kendrick, right? Or Ken Kendrick, the owner of the Diamondbacks. So
Probably not the best move.
yeah. Again, Arizona's in a good spot. Am I convinced that Smith is going to be able to handle first base for him? And or excuse me, that they're going to be getting the same production from some of their bench guys from last year, and in that DH or backup first base role if you're going to be moving Naylor over. So there are some questions about the pieces that they still have on hand, but that's about it with Arizona.
Yeah. But yeah,
Pavin Smith, excuse me.
Yeah,
Forgetting his first name there for a second.
but we'll see out there. But yeah, probably say the ownership comments.
Yeah.
Would be great.
Again, the
Not
Jordan
great.
Montgomery. Yeah,
Whole
I
situation.
being a bad boss never looks good. And Arizona, that was probably the biggest foot in the mouth from an MLB owner this offseason, I would think. Dick Montfort didn't have too much with his Greeley breakfast going on, so somebody had to be in the news in this division.
He's learned his lesson.
Yeah. So Ken Kendrick hating on Jordan Montgomery.
Yes, the hyperbolic statement of best defense ever.
We did get a little bit. We got a little bit from Montfort, but it wasn't we lost 103, so now we should win 103 or, whatever mental gymnastics had been performed before.
But it brings up with the Rockies, like we're saying, probably kind of just like average or just kind of like okay moves. But I think like you mentioned before with the outfielders, it's just not doing more moves. It felt like they're going to come into this offseason and just try to make some trades, do something, but it's these 3 kind of free agents and then a bunch of minor league signings. They haven't really tried to make any moves to trade anything or to clear more space. It's just, let's add on to what we've already had for the past couple of seasons. No, personally for me, I thought, Justin Lawrence probably isn't back in 25. Oh, he's still here.
Yeah.
And so that's what it's, for me, of why haven't the Rockies done more to just clear space like you're talking about?
Yeah. Norm, that's a good question. I'll touch on it in a second about in the hot seat. But the Rockies need to kind of start focusing also on making some moves to appease the fan base. This is a really tough spot, and obviously, we can speak about this with a little bit more direct knowledge. But overall, this is a pretty frustrated fan base and a very stagnant franchise. And you're starting to see Pittsburgh climb out of it. A lot of it is through Paul Skeens mania, which rightfully so, because it's a phenom that's capturing national attention. That's helped bring Pittsburgh out of a pretty ugly fan base, ugly feelings in the fan base. And then Colorado's been in that for a couple of years now. And there's a lot really emphasized on the future of the team through the farm system. But eventually there has to start being some results. And I think for a lot of people, it's just wanting to see results this year. And the front office didn't do a whole lot to breed optimism about improvements in 2025. And so the Rockies, if we're having the same conversation this time next year, we may be saying where it's like, you really need to do something to get the franchise or the fans back into the franchise, because we might see some pretty drastic results if we see a third straight 100-loss season with no better understanding of the future than we did 2 years ago.
Yeah. It's a lot of still just hoping and wishful thinking of, we just got to play better. And that mentality is always the thing that's going to be the worst for them every offseason.
Yeah, and it's getting very. There's a lot of fatigue about just kind of hearing that, and
Yeah.
so that's the spot that Colorado's in. Do I expect them to want to throw $170 million in an offseason to fix everything like they did with Bryant? No, they're not going to do that right now, but there needs to start being some big strides taken rather than little steps. And this
Yeah.
offseason was just a lot of little steps. So it's rightfully fair. You'd think, to the question that we got from the chat, that would put a GM on the hot seat. Colorado doesn't work that way. I
Yeah.
don't feel that there is any hot seat under Bill Schmidt. If anybody is on a hot seat, in my opinion, it's AJ Preller. This is the end of that title window. This is, you've done everything you can to win now, and there's a lot of changes in ownership. There's probably some writing on the wall if they don't reach a World Series in the next year, maybe two for Preller.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, and just like Isaac was pointing out with Bill Schmidt, because GM hot seats for GMs are really hard to determine because it's what's the if you have a president of baseball operations, they're usually kind of in charge of the team or
Yeah.
is the owner, and so they're always very tight knit, and it takes some egregious things happening for firings to happen among some teams. Isaac points out if Schmidt's a GM for another team, maybe he's fired by now, or at least we know the details of a contract of how long he's supposed to be in charge instead of a handshake
Most of the
deal
teams.
of
White Sox are kind of in that same ballpark. The White Sox and the Rockies both have their own little insular crazy nonsense, but everybody else, yes, I would agree with that for the most part.
Mhm.
Yeah, I see. Obviously, Los Angeles would take a lot going wrong for big changes to be made there. San Francisco just made their changes, and so
Yeah.
Buster Posey is now head honcho, and that's the path they're walking. And Arizona, hey man, you're not firing a World Series very often after they just made the World Series, 20 months ago. So
Yeah.
there's some good grace already built in there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's been an interesting off season thus far, and hey, we still got spring training to go, so the moves will keep on a coming
We're about what,
in
3
some
weeks
way.
till games? 3 weeks till games,
Yeah,
give or take.
it's here pretty. It's coming here pretty quick. Couple weeks.
Awesome. I'm
February
looking forward to it,
23rd for
man.
the Rockies, at least taking on the Diamondbacks. So it's right around the corner. I can almost taste it.
Baseball season, best time of the year, man. I love it.
Hmm. Yeah. Overall, it's a lot of thing for a lot of these teams where it's exactly. It's just interesting, just the differences in this division, the different looks among these different teams of what they were doing, and the Diamondbacks trying their best, and even they just had the two guaranteed major league contracts. Otherwise, it's a lot of minor league deals.
Hmm.
That's the way it is for a bunch of these teams. It seems like the Dodgers are the one going out, just getting big league free agent after big league free agent.
Dodgers walk the walk. I mean, Willy Adames and Corbin Burnes are the big swings in the division, but everything else has been so heavily tilted towards the Dodgers' favor that it's kind of weird to talk about this division because there are a few divisions in sports where as heavy of a claim is already laid than the National League West. And so it's weird to talk about, but you kind of have to set it with the rules of there's the Dodgers and then there's everybody else. That's kind of how baseball works. Macro that. And now we're talking about this division,
Yeah,
that gap is huge.
absolutely. So to cap this thing off, I guess we decided our best transaction was Roki Sasaki. What is our absolute worst from this offseason for the National League West?
Oh, did we land on Rogers? If we're talking about an on field, I'd say Taylor Rogers, that deal, in terms of the actual transactions made from this division. I'll stick with Rogers.
Yeah, I think in just strictly player transactions, it's the random trade of Taylor Rogers, uh, off the field stuff, and just theoretical and
Yeah.
philosophical questions.
San Diego has a whole lot
Yeah,
of problems
they've cornered the
going
market
on.
on that.
Yeah, but you can make sense of all of these moves. I feel like with teams, I think some of them you question, and really, if your biggest gripe is that you traded away one of your better middle relievers in the division for not enough of a return, that's way better than an offseason where Mookie Betts gets traded for peanuts. So that's the NL West is in a pretty healthy spot. Rockies aside.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. But as always, we'll be here each week, and there we go.
I think that's the better name for Major League Baseball.
Yeah,
Actually,
the Dodgers and everyone else league. We're putting that into the commissioner, Rob Manfred. We're just going to make Andrew Friedman the commissioner of baseball now.
Yeah. That reminded me of
Ohtani, commissioner of baseball.
Bring Theo Epstein back. That name was in circulation there for a minute. Let's make Theo commissioner again, or GM of the Rockies, whichever one he prefers.
There you go. No, we'll just make Ohtani. Ohtani will be commissioner. He'll also DH and pitch.
I mean, if you're the best at the sport, why not be in charge of it?
Gives himself the MVP.
I love it, man. Let's wrap her up.
So this has been Best of the West. Kenneth, where can folks find you?
I am on Twitter at KW1988. I'm over at Purple Row as well. Having an article actually popping up tomorrow too, so check that out.
And you can find me over on Twitter at Skylar Timmons, also on Blue Sky, stimmons13.bsky.social. Also find me over at purpleroad.com. Writing Wednesday Rock Piles. Had one come out today talking about the rotations for the division over the last 6 seasons, which is very interesting. Rockies have used the fewest, Kenneth, over the last 6 years.
That's actually
pitchers.
It's a very good lead into tomorrow's deal too with mine. Really good article today though, Skylar, and it kind of showed that they had some good health and some good luck there for a good string, but they've also kind of started running out of that luck a little bit in the past couple of years too. So yeah, good job emphasizing that. And then I have a little bit more to build on off of that, and more so about Dollander, Carson Palmquist, some of those young arms that they're counting on, and how that's looked in their young arms being brought up in those previous seasons that you're mentioning.
Yeah. And you can also go find plenty of articles over at BlakeStreetBanner.com, and be sure to like and subscribe here on YouTube, share with your friends and everybody else, and follow along on your favorite podcasting platforms as well. Blake Street Banner. Until next time, I'm Skylar. That's Kenneth. Appreciate Patrick behind the scenes. And remember, the best is yet to come.